Hello student. Yes, so in my this video I'll be explaining on the topic retained earnings. See, in my previous video I had explained on the concept of a dividend, where dividend is something where the company is going to share the profit, that is a portion of profit will be shared among the shareholders of the organization. And when it comes to the payment hierarchy, always the preference shareholders will be paid first, followed by the equity shareholders, who are called as the actual owners of the organization, right? So now we shall understand the concept of what is a retained earnings is all about. Again, retained earnings is said to be like one of the important sources of generating the internal funds. See, you have various source of raising the funds. You have in form of issuing the equity shares, issuing a preference shares, debentures. Fine, all these are normal, but apart from that, you can internally generate, you can internally raise in the funds if you want the capital. That is called as the retained earnings, where you are going to retain your profits, that which you have made in a particular year, right? So it is something where these particular earnings, they are going to aid in terms of meeting the financial needs. It can be short term as well as long term, right? So it is going to meet the financial needs, and again it will give a direct link towards the growth and development of the organization, right? So dividend distribution to the equity shareholders, it involves the outflow of cash. What does outflow mean? Inflow is something where the company is receiving the cash. Outflow is something where the company has to let go of the amount. That talks about the outflow of cash. Here, when you are distributing, when you are paying dividends to your shareholders, what are you doing? Out of your profits, what you have made as a firm during that particular year, out of that you are going to make the payment. So what is happening? Is the cash coming in or going out? Of course it is going out, so it is called as cash outflow of, right? So here, a high dividend rate means less a retained earning. See, it is something like when you have made more profits, if you go for declaring high dividend, just because you have made lots of good profits, if you go ahead with distributing the high rate of dividend to the shareholders, what is the impact happening on the retained earnings? Can you really retain the earnings as much as possible? It is not possible. So always a financial manager, that is the organization, basically it has to make up an optimal decision with respect to what should be the rate of dividend that should be declared. Just because I made lots of profits or huge profits, that doesn't mean I have to end up paying high rate of dividend, isn't it? A provision, a portion of it, a reserve, something you have to retain your earnings, right? What's the purpose, ma'am? The reason is that, see, you never know. Always I've told that the business, whether it is small business or big business, always it deals with two factors. One is a risk, another one is the uncertainty. Risk is something predictable, right? Whereas uncertainty is something where you're not aware of the event. Only when it occurs you will experience it, then you will sit and you will think how it should be, it can be overcome, right? That's how things are going to work. So a portion of profits, it should be kept apart. Earnings should be retained, it should be hold back. It can be in terms of on later basis, you can just pour in that money in terms of expansion, diversification for the growth and development of the organization, right? So which may again consequently results in the slower growth. When it is going to result in slower growth, when you have less amount in terms of retained earnings. If you go for paying higher rates of dividends, you are left with what? Just a minute in a amount, right? So it's very important you take care of these retained earnings as well. So again, this is one of the important functions, where the financial manager, he must carefully divide and allocate the earnings between the dividends and the retained earnings. In simple words, a financial manager, he has to make an ideal decision with respect to what should be the rate of dividend that needs to be distributed among the shareholders of the firm, and what should be the retained earnings, what is the amount I have to retain out of the profits, so that I can use somewhere in the future, right? So deferred consumption is going to happen out of that, right? So now What is this retained earnings is all about? See, like an individual, even the companies, they are going to set aside, like how individuals are going to do. See, we, what do we do? See, even though you earn 100 rupees, 1000 rupees, you are not going to spend entire, the amount what you have got in terms of salary, right? You are going to keep aside a portion of your amount. If you are getting to 1000 rupees, you would keep at least 100, 200 rupees, right? So think like that, somewhere in the future, when you're in need of money, you can use that, right? Likewise, the companies also, a portion of profit they are going to keep it aside in order to, meet any kind of future requirements or the uncertainties that is going to occur, right? So here the portion of profits, it is not distributed among the shareholders. That talks about the retained earnings, right? Where the business is going to use at the time of any kind of a future requirements, that is retained earnings. And it is something like, which is a prefer, uh, which is preferred, like, you know somewhere it is, all about a plowing back of the profit. See, retained earnings, it is also called as plowing back. What does it mean? Whatever the profits I have retained, I can again put it back, in form of capital, that's for expansion or diversification, again for the growth and development of my organization, right? So again, this is one of the important sources where you can, internally generate, within the organization, from the profits what you have made, out of that you can raise in the money, right? So here again, it can be used for fixed capital, or it can be used in terms of working capital, right? So retained earnings, they are going to increase the value of shareholders in terms of, growing of the firms. That's how things are going to work. And you have something called as, a cost of financing. See, it is a general belief that retained earnings have a no cost of the company. Tell me why? Because you have generated it internally, you haven't borrowed it from outside, isn't it? When you have borrowed it from outside, what you have to pay? You have to end up paying the interest, higher rate of interest. But out of your profits, you have retained it. After that, you are going to use that. Do you think there's a cost attached? Of course no, there's no cost attached. Then apart from that, you have something called as, flotation cost, where, you know unlike other sources of financing, the use of retained earnings, it's going to help, in avoiding the various issues which is related to the cost. Since the main, advantage is that you have internally raised in, out of the profits, you have declared dividends, and a portion of it you have kept it in form of, retained earnings, where you can plow back in form of, a capital. It will lead to expansion, diversification, and that will lead to the growth, development of the organization, right? So, and you have something like, which is a cheaper source of financing, it is set up because, like the use of retained earnings, it doesn't involve any kind of acquisition cost. What is acquisition? So if you want to raise the funds in form of debentures, when you're raising, will that person give you in form of like, yeah, you can take it for free? Of course no. It is always attached with the fixed rate of interest. But when it comes to the, this kind of retained earnings, do you think, is there any kind of acquisition cost when you want to raise? Do you think you will have to pay something? Of course no, because it's internally generated out of the profits what the company has made. Out of that itself, you are going to upload it back. So the company here, it is not going to have any kind of obligation, that is to pay anything, with respect to the retained earnings, right? Then you have something called, a financial stability under retained earnings. See, retained earnings, they basically, strengthen the financial position of a business, and, thereby they're going to give the financial stability to the business. They here, you don't have the tension of, paying your, the cost of flotation is there, was the cost of capital attached, right? So that's one advantage. And you can go ahead with the stable dividend, where the shareholders, they may get the stable dividend even if the company doesn't earn enough of profits, because you have your retained earnings, right? Where you are going to use these earnings at the time of any kind of financial crisis, or is there any kind of need or circumstances for the organization, right? Then something like a market value. See, Retained earnings, they are going to strengthen. I've told you what they're going to strengthen. They are going to strengthen the financial position of the company, and they're going to appreciate, the capital, which ultimately is going to increase the market value of the shares, right? Then see, just like a two sides of coin, you have both advantages and disadvantages. Now we have learned what are the things, that can be done out of the retained earnings, how it can be a boon for the organization. Now we shall understand what are the disadvantages that was attached with a retained earnings. One thing is that there can be possibility of, the improper utilization of funds. See, if the purpose for, like utilization of a retained earnings is not clearly stated, then it may definitely lead to the careless spending of funds. So you know that you have it, your money you have set apart in form of reserves. When you haven't made any kind of plan what you have to do with this, what is going to happen, right? If there is no proper utilization, it will all, seems to be meaningless and irrelevant. So it is very important to take care of, how you are going to utilize, how you are going to allocate the funds. Then it can lead to the over capitalization. See, conservative, like the dividend policy, it might lead to the, like a huge accumulation of retained earnings, and again that will lead to the over capitalization. This is what, I've been telling in my previous videos also. There shouldn't be like under capitalization or over capitalization. It should be sufficient, adequate amount of the money resource in the hand, so that according to the plan you can go ahead, in terms of the procedures, right? Then it can lead to the lower rate of dividend as well. See, retained earnings, they do not allow, the shareholders to enjoy full benefit, that is in terms of, actual earnings of the company. So this is going to, like a kind of create, not only the dissatisfaction among the shareholders, but it can also, like adversely affect the market shares of the values, right? So this is how the things are going to work. So to sum up with the concept of a retained earnings, so it is nothing but a portion of profits, which is not distributed among the shareholders, but it is retained, it is holded back, and it is used in the business, right? And it is also called as a plowing back of a profit. What are the profit you have got, you are going to retain at the time of any kind of financial crisis, needs, or any kind of circumstances the company faces. At that time, this particular, retained earnings, it acts as a, financing. Yes, the internal financing, it can be used for both, fixed capital, or in terms of a working capital as well. Where the retained earnings is one advantage is that it is going to increase the value of the shareholders, that is in case of, like a growing firm, right? So this is all about the concept of retained earnings.